Greetings, you've landed at the VUC, IP Communications and VoIP Community. We would like to thank Simwood.com for their support. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco. Our hosted PBX is from onsip.com. You can go to getonsip.com for a URL people can click to call you. We've been privileged over the last 5 years to be using the best conference bridge on the planet. Yes, I'm talking about zipdx.com, full color, full featured, full HD conference bridge. Our website, vuc.me on the webs, hosted by bluehost.com. And our worldwide local rate dial-ins are from voxbone.com. All right, and as that brilliant young man stated, this is VUC 569, and I just have a little announcement before we bring on our guest, which is Ind.ie, Aral Balkan. But before we do that, I have here we go, Tad Hack, Paris, December 12th. Our regulars are going to be there. Right, James? I'm putting you on camera.
Yes, Andy and I will both be there, and this time,
Mr.
Timbo will be there as well, Mr. Santa Claus himself.
Exactly, and here's a shot of Andy. Now, here's our guest, Aral Balkan. It took me maybe 9 months to get you on. Hi.
Hello. Hi, Randy. How are you?
Everything is everything. We're just trying to get there. We go. I actually have myself on now. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things because the Ind.ie, which you need to go to right now and take a look at, has a lot of interesting ideas and philosophies besides the there's no live stream. Oh, that's bad news, isn't it? I think there may be one soon. I'll have to go take a look while Aral is talking. I'm going to turn it over to you with the question. You're the co-founder. Let's talk about the genesis, first of all, of the entire project. Can we do that?
Sure. So Indie's been around for about 2 years now. It started out as, I guess, part of my own evolution as someone who's just been making things with technology ever since I was 7 years old. Initially in a very hedonistic way, just games to make myself happy. Because there weren't that many games on the IBM XT computer that my dad brought home, but there was a basic manual. And then slowly realizing that the things that I make can have real effects on people. So on their lives, can affect them positively or negatively, can empower them or enfeeble them. And then just a slow realization that perhaps a lot of the things that we make in the mainstream, a lot of the things that we that come out of Silicon Valley, while they could be great experiences that empower you in the here and now, that they might have ramifications for our human rights and for democracy in the long term. So to give you an example, Google Maps is a great product. If you're lost, if you want to get somewhere, you can look it up on Google Maps and it will get you there. That empowers you in the here and now. But what's the cost? The cost is that Google gets to know where you're going. Google gets to know about you and uses that information to prop up its bottom line. And that's how they make their money. That's their core business model, knowing as much about you as possible. And so for me, it was this personal journey of realizing I don't want to contribute to this model. And unfortunately, this is the mainstream model today. So it's very hard not to work in technology and not contribute to it. And so that's why I started Indie.
Let me ask you a question directly regarding pretty much Google, but also all of this stuff. You and I were talking, we're going to get into that as well, the mailing lists and the whole monetizing of the data. But regarding Google, I wondered if you had read or were familiar with the book Private Parts by Jeff, whatever his name is.
No.
Does anybody remember that name? Who's a professor of journalism in New York. Anyway, he is his thing is basically, well, there's nothing's going to be private in the future. Let's enjoy. And I mean, this is one side of the conversation. Let's enjoy the fact that we can use the maps. They're free. I mean, if you think about how costly it was for them to acquire the maps and then to keep them going
Right.
and all of that, blah blah blah. Devil's advocate here. A lot of people sign into that and they're okay with it, and that's it. Now, what you're saying is 100% true, even more true, because if you look, they keep adding stuff so that you can look at, for example, every place you've been in the last month, and now they know it, and now you can know it. Isn't that nice? They're sharing your data with you.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, there are a lot of issues that you brought up there, actually. It's not just one. Starting with, in the future or today, none of us will have privacy, and we should get used to that. If that was true, maybe I'd have less of an issue with it. If I didn't have any privacy, you didn't have any privacy, the NSA didn't have any privacy, and Google didn't have any privacy, then maybe that's a more level playing field. But whereas we think that it's natural perhaps today for Google to know everything about us, that we volunteered, or maybe don't know that we volunteered because certain sensors are picking things up that we didn't realize we were volunteering, or if we might think that it's natural for the government to know things about us. A lot of us don't. But what we can't do is, I can't take a camera and walk into Google Incorporated's offices and say, hey Google, let me take a look at what you guys are doing. I'd be arrested. I can't walk into the NSA and say, hey, let me just look at some of this paperwork that you guys have. I'd be arrested. So what we have is kind of a bizarro world where the very people who have a right to privacy because it's a human right, which are individuals, don't have it. And the institutions which don't have a right to privacy and which should actually, in a democratic environment, be transparent and open, corporations and governments do have a right to privacy. So we're kind of living in bizarro world today. That's just one of those, the issues, the initial issue.
And it's exactly the same thing as when you call. This has happened to me. You call somebody and they say the call is recorded. First you get a recording saying this call may be recorded for quality control purposes. Then when the live operator comes on and says, hi, my name is Jay, this call may be recorded for quality control purposes, I have said, that's fine because I'm recording it too. They go, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to hang up.
Well, there you go. So, to get to the premise of that book that you were talking about, the premise is false. Everything isn't public. Only our information as individuals is public today. And that's because these systems have been designed very much in line with a certain business model that benefits from our information being public. But this has chilling effects. This has chilling effects for freedom of speech. This has, if everything is public, then that alters your behavior, right? This was kind of the premise of 1984. If you know that someone is watching, whether it's Big Brother or big corporation, you alter your behavior. People already do this. We say, the other point that you raised was, well, people don't care, right? I don't believe that. People are actively being lied to. When you go and use a Google product, it doesn't say, hey, by the way, you know that we're monetizing your information, that we are profiling you, and that's how we make money. No, it says, here are our features. Here's what you're going to get out of it. Really focus on that. And there are millions being spent by these corporations to create a very specific narrative. The Google Doodles, right? How could they do anything bad when they have such cute doodles? But this part of, there are people who are employed at Google whose titles are storyteller. What is the story that they're telling and why?
Well, also, there's recently was a gathering of, I forgot what they call it, but they're major contributors, people like you and me. Well, not you, I guess, but I do a lot of posting on Google, and I admit that I have given them a lot. And I was just using Maps yesterday. I mean, I get all that. It's not necessarily that I'm thrilled with it. I feel that we can always turn it off or turn the phone off or uninstall the app. You can probably attack that premise in just a second. But what I was going to say is let's not stop at Google. Let's talk Facebook and let's talk everything else. And also there's been quite a few new entries, of one of which is Ello, E-L-L-O, who has no invest. Well, there was just minor scandal when they first started, but as far as I know, they are not mining anybody's data, but I don't know. Anyway, who else and what would you call the most insidious? Would you dare to make a comment on that?
Well, I think you touched upon what the real issue is, the real problem is. Much more than any one of these companies using this business model, the real problem is all of these companies are using the same business model. So you might say you have a choice. Turn off Google. Okay, fine. I'm not going to use any of Google's products, but I still need to search the web. So what should I use? Yahoo. What's Yahoo's business model? Oh, it's the same. It's to profile me. It's to surveil me. It's to track me and to create a profile. Okay. So I don't use Yahoo. What do I use? Do I use Snapchat? Do I use Instagram? All the same business model. So at one point, we're getting to a point where the decision that we're really being presented with is either consent to being profiled, to being monetized, to being the product, to being farmed, or don't use modern technology. Because what we're building today, these products, these everyday things, are our new sidewalks, our new roads, our new parks. And we view them as public spaces, but they're not. They're private property. We might think of them as parks, but they're actually shopping malls. And if the owner of a shopping mall doesn't like what your t-shirt says, they are well within their rights to chuck you out. You have no right to freedom of speech within private property. You have the only rights you have are what the owners of that private property allow you to have. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of future are we building where all of our new everyday things are shopping malls and not parks? Where, you know, these things that we use for carrying out conversations that are central to democratic agency are all private property. I mean, this. I think you touched upon this. We can't turn them off. They're not just optional anymore.
And this explains to a great extent a few people who I wouldn't say business with. I'm talking about, for example, music artists. There are many people who are not at all connected to the internet, to the point, I mean, they have an internet connection, but they don't use any apps or any kind of communications at all. And it's even difficult to get them on email. And the same people are hard to get on SMS as well, actually, but at least they look at that once in a while and can't be without a phone all day. They eventually get to looking at the message, at least at some point. But I actually have that problem, and I think the counter problem is that I'm too much on the internet. I spend too much time, and I think everybody here is guilty of that, actually, too. We're all on 50 million channels. James Bodie, for example, who's with us, he's on, I don't know how many phone numbers he's got. None of them ever answer, but he's got all those phone numbers. He's on a million Hangouts.
Yeah, that's not true, Randy.
Not 100% true.
You keep on saying you
How do I
I'll answer my calls, but that may be because I don't want to answer them. I have the choice.
Okay. What do you think of all this business about you? Because you're on Facebook, right, James? You can unmute. And
I am. And
is that your where do you spend the most time? Facebook, Wire?
I'm all over the place, and people who know me say, yeah, that sounds about right. You're all over the place. I'm omnipresent. I use multiple streams all the time. And Andy and I have got a rule, which is we're not allowed to use the same communication means twice in a row. It forces us to continually revolve and use different communications means, because it's a healthy thing to do. I would hate to be stuck using one single communication means only. I'd start getting worried and uncomfortable.
And we often use Wire, which is they tell us encrypted and so on, and
we use Matrix. Yeah, I'm using Matrix now,
right,
to take the IRC, the VUC IRC.
But the question is, how are they? I'm going to warn Andy Abramson that he's going to be on in a second, so he can start thinking about what he wants to say. But before that, I just wanted to ask, all of these new services that come up, including Wire, which we all love and use, nobody really knows, how are they going to ever pay for all those guys that are and women who are working on the code? What's the model here? We don't know, and of course they've not said. Do you have any idea?
Question. You should be asking, what is your business model? Especially if you're told that something is free, because you know it's not free. So what is your business model? And if the answer is we don't know yet, then their business model is to farm you. And
I
if
have
the
to
answer,
I have to
well,
correct you. If the answers we don't know yet, you're talking to Twitter.
well, no, they know how they're going to make money.
And they do generate revenue.
Is a euphemism. Or at some point when the network effects have kicked in, we're going to monetize you.
Right. Andy Abramson, since you're here, I know you got something to say.
They're built to flip.
Yeah.
It's
Venture
so
capital.
simple.
This is the venture
Wires,
capital.
wires are built to flip model, which is what they did successfully with Skype twice, 3 times. Think about the first flip to eBay and then the second flip to Silver or whatever they're called, the VC fund after Index screwed up. And then along came Microsoft that took all this foreign money that was sitting outside the U.S., $9 billion, and brought it back into the U.S. to put more revenue on the books. And now what we see is Skype isn't even what we remember. But Wire is clearly building the flip because there is no revenue model. You can't dial out yet. You don't have numbers. So there's no revenue coming in. There's no ads being pushed through it, so there's no ad revenue. So what are they really doing? They're building a tool. And right now I actually think that a lot of what they're doing is behavioral testing and seeing how people behave and what they embrace and what they adopt. They're learning. They're not worrying about. They've got Giannis's money. So what, he made how much money on Skype each time? So they don't have to worry about cash. They have to worry about is what people are going to do with it.
So they're basically in a lab and they're watching what the lab rats do, and the lab rats in this scenario are us. And this is the Silicon Valley model. It's fueled by venture capital. It's based on exits. I mean, the moment you get venture capital, the way that it works is you've sold your company. The sale isn't complete, but you've sold all of your future users. That's what someone's paid you for. Either to complete that sale to another company, like a larger company, like Andy was saying, or to IPO. But at the very beginning, we've sold. We can't build long-term sustainable businesses this way because we've sold from day zero. And that's one of the core problems that we have with this model. We need alternatives to this funding model as well.
Okay, well, this is where I'd ask you, Aral, what motivates you? I mean, you've sold a family asset to finance building Heartbeat.
Yeah.
Where's that going? How's that going to work? And what's motivating you?
The thing that motivates me is I want to create the kind of world that I want to live in. I think we're all very privileged in that we, to various degrees, have that ability. So I don't need a home in Ankara, which is what we sold, to get this thing started. I do need to live in a world where I have human rights, and I would like to live in a democracy and not a corporatocracy going forward. So that's what motivates me. I don't want to live in a world where my only options as someone who loves making things, designing things, and building things is to build them for Google or for Facebook with the ultimate aim of farming people. I don't want to be a people farmer. That is not why I do this. So I want to build things that truly empower people and respect their human rights. Create things that empower them, great experiences, but without eroding their human rights. That's what motivates me, and it's a selfish motivation. This is not. This isn't in any way philanthropic. This is selfish. I want to live in that world, therefore I do what I do. And we just sold our share in another property that my family had, a smaller one. I mean, we're not rich. My dad's a professor, and my mom's trained as a librarian. But the first one was a cooperative that we paid into for 30 years. The second one was a family a property that we had a share of from our family. But we don't take venture capital, so we have to subsidize what we're doing until we become sustainable. The goal is to become sustainable, of course.
And the question is, how are you going to become sustainable?
So right now I'm working on a second app, which I haven't announced yet, as one of two apps that we're going to have. One is Heartbeat, and the other is this one. Whereas Heartbeat is an alternative in the sense of here's how we could be doing things differently in a social platform. This app is more how do we stop the abuses of the current mainstream. So these two apps, this app is going to be available for sale on the App Store. So kind of a very indie model, a very old model of here's a product, please buy it. For Heartbeat, the next version, instead of getting your name on Heartbeat, like us acting as an identity server and saying, a provider and saying, okay, you can be Aral because no one else is Aral, and then you're Aral on Heartbeat, in the next version, that's going to be a domain name. One that we can register seamlessly in the sign-up process. And then if you want an always-on encrypted node, we can host that, end-to-end encrypted. We can host that. And that's going to be our business model. And if it's free and open, so if you don't want to host it with us, don't. If you have the technical knowledge, host it elsewhere. There will be other competitors, hopefully, that host it if it takes off. But we will be competing on the seamlessness of the experience. If you don't want to care about that and just put in your credit card number, for example, and say, okay, I'll pay you X amount a year to host my encrypted node, there's our business model. So it's a much older business model. We sell products, not people. And that was great timing on flipping that slide over to the Ethical Design Manifesto.
Yeah, I was thinking we could go there now, and you can comment on this.
This was not scripted.
Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what motivates us, we just released the Ethical Design Manifesto to try and articulate that in the simplest possible way. It is to sell products, not people. You know, ethical design, it basically, I based it on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, something that initially Aaron Walters did for design, but starting with, at its very core, a respect for human rights. That's where mainstream technologies, that's where Silicon Valley falls flat. We're building products that don't respect human rights. And when we do that, we're not building products for people, we're building products on the backs of people. So, of course, we don't stop there. We have to build things that respect human effort, that are functional, reliable, that work, and work well, and are convenient. And then respect human experience. Build things that are delightful. So it's not that we build different products that meet one or more of these criteria. It is building products that are a cross-section, that cover a cross-section of this. But if we get the base wrong, the rest of it really doesn't matter. And that's key. So, you know, this is proven to be really good. Sorry, go ahead.
Really good. That echo's coming back again. So can you just mute and then unmute again, and that will recenter the echo.
Yeah, there's an issue with echo cancellation. Aral, you're going to have to mute now because Chrome dies. The echo cancellation kind of dies after some time. And now you're coming back. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. If you mute and then come back again, it should sort it out. So there's some really good word bites in here. Design without diversity is imperialism. I love that one. I think I'm going to print that out and put it on the wall. It sounds a bit like Apple, doesn't it? Design without diversity, because within Apple there's only one way of doing it, and it's the Johnny Ive way of doing it, which is absolutely brilliant. Johnny Ive is one of my heroes. But you know what? Going back to your pyramid there, that looks remarkably similar to some of the ethics that at the core of Google's way of doing business, because they know that as soon as they start doing really evil stuff, the backlash from the global population will totally kill them. So Google cannot afford to do anything particularly evil. So they have to respect human rights, they have to respect human effort, and they have to respect human experience, because if they don't, they're dead. What do you say about that, Aral?
So there's a difference between authentically being committed to ethical design and public relations. So the only thing that you have to analyze to understand where Google is coming from is their business model. You don't need any convoluted conspiracy theories. How do they make their money? They make their money by tracking people, by profiling people, and then monetizing that. Not necessarily selling it to anyone else, monetizing it themselves. We are their raw materials. We are what they mine and refine and monetize. That is not in any way compatible with respecting human rights. So of course, like I said, they spend millions and millions creating a narrative. And they invest in things like open source, but open source does not equate to freedom. Open source can be open as in public relations. It can be open as in open for business. If they were truly an open company, of course, they would open source their core products, none of which are open source. I think it's important to understand what their core business model is, and then to ask, is that compatible with the respect for human rights? Now, to take you back to what you were saying about the Ethical Design Manifesto, though, you pulled out a very interesting bit there, design without diversity, being colonialist in nature. I think it's very ironic, given that today we're having this conversation. I think is there 5 of us here? And I'm not sure if you guys can see the screen with everyone on there, but we seem to share a common characteristic. Does anyone want to point out what that is?
All of us, apart from you, Aral, are old.
Well, there is
well, except for Mr. Andy Abramson, who's eternally young. Look at him.
possibly one more thing that is even more striking than that.
Well, we're all male.
We're all male, but we tried to get Laura on, didn't we? Get Laura on straight away. Come on.
I think it's very important that we realize that this is part of the problem that we have in our industry. And by this I mean, what we're trying to tackle is, at least what we're trying to work towards, is to create a more decentralized world, a more sustainable world, one where we're not practicing design in a colonialist way. And what I mean by that is, design by its very nature is a group of people together trying to solve a problem for another group of people. Now, if the first group, the designers, are of a certain demographic, and the people that they are designing for is of a very different demographic, then we get an ethnographic approach to design, where we have the other. So we are, say, a group of, let's say we're a design team right now. We're all white guys, right? We all have a very shared culture. We have certain viewpoints that are probably quite similar. And we are designing for, say, a diverse audience. For us, they are the other. We have to study them. We have to kind of understand what makes them tick. It's a very short step from calling them users to calling them dumb users when they're the other. There's an approach that we can take that's the opposite of this. What if, instead of five white guys sitting here today, it was a diverse panel, and say we were designing a solution? By designing for ourselves as a diverse organization, we would be designing for a diverse audience. That is the opposite of colonialist design. That is the opposite of ethnographic design. So that bit in the manifesto about diversity isn't necessarily about design by committee or anything. No, it's about making our organizations diverse so that we can design for diverse audiences without being ethnographic in how we carry that out. And I think this is really key. We have to understand that this is key in trying to achieve the goal that we're trying to go for. A lot of Silicon Valley design is very ethnographic in its nature. It's very colonialist in its nature. I mean, we get things like internet.org from Facebook or whatever they're calling it today, where we say, hey, the white man will bring the fire to places that the fire doesn't exist in, but terms and conditions may apply. So that's the kind of effects that it has. I think we need to all step back, and it's hard to do. It's hard for us to, I know this firsthand. I grew up in a very privileged way, and for the longest time, never examined that privilege, and was very happy with it. And I think it's sometimes a long process. It's sometimes a very introspective process, but one that we all have to some degree engage in and make an effort to create a more diverse, to create more diverse organizations and groups, not as a charity, but to realize that this is competitive advantage for us if we are trying to build these new products for diverse audiences in a way that doesn't take advantage of them.
And there's Jay Carpenter. Oh, I'm getting Jay. Hello. Jay Carpenter in IRC asked if Ind.ie is using or planning to use blockchain technology. And blockchain technology is something that I've heard of, but I have absolutely not the first idea of what it is.
Okay, so blockchain. Blockchain is interesting for certain use cases where you do need a shared ledger that doesn't require trust. It is not the only way to build decentralized systems. So for what we're building with Heartbeat right now, blockchain is not necessary. It is a peer-to-peer system that we've built. And in some ways, actually, that is superior to a blockchain-based solution. So for example, let's say that we were encrypting all of our messages and we were keeping it on the blockchain. And we use state-of-the-art encryption today. For, say, the NSA to come and to get a list of all of those messages, or to get all of those messages, they would just have to download the blockchain, whichever one that we're using. And they would have all the messages encrypted. And maybe they couldn't decrypt it today, but in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time, when IBM and Google's quantum computer is up and running and quantum computing becomes maybe more affordable for other agencies, and they have a quantum computer, they could trivially break the encryption that we're using today. And they would have all the messages in one place. Whereas with Heartbeat being peer-to-peer, if we have a million people using Heartbeat, the messages would be in a million different places. And they would actually have to go to a million different places to get all of those messages. So depending on what you're building, if you're building, trustless contracts, etc., great, blockchain sounds like a great idea for that. But I think there's a lot of hype around blockchain, and people seem to sometimes confuse decentralization with blockchain, or for a need for blockchain. I see blockchain as something that we might layer on top. So things like IPFS, the interplanetary file system, is very interesting. It's a blockchain-based kind of permanent web, which might be interesting for public messages that we don't want anyone to be able to take down. So that if someone targets you because you're talking about a certain subject that a government might feel, maybe a repressive government feels that you shouldn't be talking about, on IPFS they would have to take it down from as many nodes as there are. So maybe layering that on top would be interesting. But I'm definitely not of the mind that blockchain is the end-all, be-all of decentralization. It is a design decision, just like anything else. Where it makes sense, we might layer it on and use it. At its core, Heartbeat is peer-to-peer.
Okay, so Aral, how are you achieving the cryptographic overlay on Heartbeat? And in particular, how are you doing the crypto changes? Because they're the key bit involved in keeping everything secure. What's the plan? How do you do it?
So at its core, Heartbeat uses a fork of SyncThing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with SyncThing. It is a peer-to-peer file synchronization service. So where at rest, currently, in the latest the code that we have, at rest, any encryption that exists is external. So for example, it's a Mac application. So if you have full disk encryption on your Mac, then it is encrypted at rest. And during transit, we use SSL and TLS, actually, of course, during transit. So there is a negotiation that SyncThing does, a public-private key style negotiation. But basically what we're doing is file transfers, decentralized. Think of it as SyncThing as decentralized, free and open source BitTorrent sync. And every message that is sent, like you're seeing some messages that Randy had sent, is actually a tiny snippet of HTML that is saved onto the file system and synchronized through the system. So you see text here, but that could be a video that's a few gigabytes. The interface really is you save. That is your API for how to use this. You save a message onto the hard drive, and that synchronizes via SyncThing. So that's the core of it.
So are you saying that you're running an architecture with a centralized, or a number of centralized key servers which deal with the cryptographic key distribution?
No, the way the two nodes communicate is you need to have, you basically have you have to authenticate on both sides. So when I want to be friends with you on Heartbeat, right? So I send you a friend request, and you say, okay, Aral, yes, I accept that, and I have to say, yes, I accept by sending you the friend request, I've said I accept, so both ends actually have to agree for that connection to exist to begin with.
Okay, well, one of the big problems there is how do you actually know that the person who's asking to be your friend actually is the person that you know?
You don't. So if you need to verify that, like in other systems, you would go out of band to verify it. You do not know, and that's not a problem that I'm actually trying to solve with this. I think that's a very different problem, and one that I don't think we would be able to solve. One of the things that with the next version of having your own domain name is that might be somewhat easier to verify, because you could look up who has records, etc. But I think, if that is something that is important for you, I think that's a phone call. Or
that is the major issue of the day, though. I just posted I posted on Google Plus just to show people what to look for. I got a thing that was already marked by Google as spam. Yet another service of Google, reading all your email entirely, letter for letter. I mean, it's machine doing that supposedly, and then one of the benefits is that they're really good at spam detection. Anyway, this thing was a very, very authentic looking thing saying your iTunes account has been suspended. It's an old ruse that's people use, but this just was, for once, had no grammar mistakes and so on. It looked really, really good. And basically, most people would go, well, first of all, you have to have an iTunes account, just like when they sent the bank stuff around. But the point is, anyway, you're looking at the email. Not that many people are capable of looking at the email. You either look at the source or you look at where these links are going. Well, in the case of Google, what they did is they've done this for you, and they know it's crap. Even though it looked really good, they already knew by the return URLs to click on or whatever. They neutralized the URLs and so on. Point being, though, other than Google, who have read all this stuff and gotten reports from probably millions of people saying this is a phishing attempt. If I get a call, James, you called earlier today with some wacky name that I had no idea who that was.
Yeah, it's always
right?
different. If you see something random coming into your phone,
it's James.
It's normally
no, but my point is that your question was an excellent one, but Aral's answer is actually true. You almost have to go out of channel. I mean, by definition, if you're not going out of channel, there's always a chance of some kind of man in the middle, isn't there?
Yeah, well, there are things you can use. I mean, the matrix.org approach is a really good way of doing it.
Let's hear it.
But you know what? I'm not going to talk about that because we've got shows. We've got Matthew and Daniel to do that. But there are other ways of doing it, like these things. I have where are I? Over here. A pile of these things. High grade crypto in these, and they're very, very difficult to get at. And there's a level of trust associated with these that make it, well, virtually impossible to forge these.
So you've got a SIM card there, but still, how does that relate to the problem of knowing who's calling you?
Identity here. We're not. So what I can say to you is this person on Ind.ie today, in the way that it's architected, that says that they're Aral, is Aral. Because they are signing on with the same device that they signed on with initially. So that's that. I can authenticate in that way, but I can't prove that the person that is saying that they're Aral has the handle Aral is actually Aral Balkan, born on this date and of this height and etc. And at that point, if I was to try and do that, I would have to become an identity provider of some sort beyond what I'm doing. And that is something that I don't ever want to get into, and that's
something I want to get into, because we've got these things and we've got these things which read your fingerprint.
Yeah.
And then we've got voice analysis. There are lots of things we can do, and each one is not perfect. But if you run them together, layer upon layer upon layer, the chances of somebody being able to do a Mission Impossible type penetration of your systems gets less and less with each layer you put on top. So yeah,
I think the solution to this problem is very simple. My wife and I have done this after watching Invasion from Mars, where the people are taken over by aliens. Not literally, we didn't really do this then, but we were saying you need a code word that only that person is the only person on the planet who knows that. And all these science fiction movies where somebody's been taken over by somebody else, that would be solved. My wife and I have the code word. I go, what's the code word? Okay, bullet to the head if she doesn't know, right? Anyway, joking around, but the point is, this is really a big problem. It really is. And I don't see, there is no way that you can guarantee this in-channel, in-band. So I feel that if you're expecting a call from somebody, I mean, if you're expecting an email from somebody, and they have this big image, and you know this person very well, and you can recognize, I mean, this is all you on the end of the receiving end. That's what I'm saying. Otherwise, you have to call that person and go, did you send me this email with a huge a .exe file? I mean, right? To me.
Or did you send me a big zip file containing a Mac binary, which
Yeah.
you invited me to install on my Mac? And I said, no way.
And did it say?
What,
Did it say?
what's
You
his
won't
heartbeat?
believe. You won't believe this
I'm not
photo of
putting
you.
I'm
You
not
won't.
putting heartbeat on my Mac. Thank you
Right.
very much. I
You
don't.
won't believe this photo that's circulating about. You won't say what. You won't believe what they're saying about you. Here's a photo of it. Let's get back to Aral.
What
Right.
photo? You've been looking at my
Comic relief.
photos again, haven't you?
Comic relief. Let's get back to our guest.
Yes.
So let's take a quick look at. I had this shared, and then we got off onto a tangent a little bit. Let me go back to the share. Aral. We'll take a quick look at this saying in front that this is pre-beta, pre-alpha. You say so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's a little exchange. I became friends with Laura, which was nice because I've been talking to her via email for something like 6
and
months.
where is Laura?
She's coming, James. Hold on, we saved the best for last. So she showed that we could do a photo. I don't know what you want to say about this, Aral, but it's because it's pre-alpha. I mean, here it is. It's a client. It looks nice, and
we have a Unicode character there of some sort that didn't make it through apparently. Don't know
what was that?
There's a Unicode character placeholder that didn't make it
Oh,
through.
is it? I didn't.
So yeah, basically what you're doing there is, well, you're in your old friends folder. There's Laura saying, I'm listening. Just kidding. So you're in your old friends folder, so you're talking, so the messages there are being sent to you and all of your friends. You could go on the tab underneath and send a direct message directly to Laura as well if you click on her there. Yeah. So anything that you send there to her goes between your device and her device and nowhere else. And it's encrypted with TLS in transit. So you know, if I wanted to know what you said, I would actually have to have physical access to her unlocked computer in order to get that.
Except that I'm sharing the screen.
Well, yes, of course. Yeah, you're entirely violating her privacy rights.
I know.
But yeah, so that's basically how it works, and that's as easy as as difficult as it needs to be perfectly honest. What you're showing right now is the private timeline, which isn't very useful right now, but once we support multiple devices, though that timeline will only be shared among your own devices and nobody else. So you can drag files in there, etc., and it can act as a private Dropbox in a sense. And the UI isn't perfect for that right now, but you know, initially in the pre-alpha, everything looks like a timeline. In the future, those timelines will evolve to be features, so that your private timeline may look a lot more like Dropbox. And you might have a backgammon game in addition to just a timeline where you play backgammon with someone directly. And you know, in the future, who knows? Maybe we have a free and open source phone, and this is the interface that you see when the phone starts. So you know, there are things that we have future plans for, but that's in the long-term future.
And this is all open source, is it?
Concept, right?
Can we have a look at the code?
That's Oscar.
Because you know, we're a little bit kind of paranoid about things, so we don't trust anything until we've actually been through the code ourselves.
Well, exactly, and that's the only thing that's worthy of your trust. The only platform, the only systems that are worthy of your trust are systems that you don't have to trust. That's why everything that we do is free and open source. It's available. Go to source.ind.ie, and you can look through the source. Of course, if you get a binary, that still doesn't prove that there is, you know, that there isn't a backdoor in there. So the only way you can be truly certain is if you do compile it yourself, which you're able to do. And that's part of the reason why I'm talking to you today from Iceland, because we are looking to leave the UK, because I can't guarantee that in the next 5 years we won't get a knock on the door saying, here's a bit of code, can you please include this in the binary that you put on the App Store, because of course David Cameron has explicitly asked for backdoors into messaging technologies. It does kind of suck. We do quite enjoy living in the UK, but we can't, I think, both do that and maintain our integrity in the next 5 years. So,
Well, in the UK, if somebody tries that on you, you just say no. It's quite simple.
if you can say no, and again,
Well, I think you can, and certain people around here have actually said no quite forcefully. So,
they have.
so you can.
It'll be interesting to see what happens when the investigative powers bill, if that passes, if David Cameron gets what he wants. We could very easily have a system that exists like the one in the U.S. or perhaps even worse, where you won't even be able to tell anyone that you've got this request. I mean, there's a lot we can do to oppose this. But being a tiny, tiny social enterprise, I mean, I'm the main developer and designer here. Laura's a designer on the project, and Joe's one of our co-founders. But we are so tiny that I can't both potentially fight this battle with the government and build what we're building in the next 5 years. So that's really why we're looking for a place where we won't have to do that. And it may not happen. But I don't like the direction that things are going in.
I don't think anyone could have ever predicted, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm 100% wrong, but I certainly could never have predicted the Patriot Act and what happened. Even after the event, I still would never have expected that. If anybody can say that they saw that prefigured, that's not me anyway. I can't see it.
And this is what nearly all Western governments are asking for today. We're looking at the prospect of a worldwide Patriot Act. Which is why it's difficult. I mean, I was here. I was at the Icelandic Parliament today, meeting with the head of the Pirate Party here. They are very popular in Iceland. She's a member of Parliament here, and we were talking about these issues. And really, nowhere is perfect. And I'm not looking for perfection in terms of where we're going to be. I just don't want this to be an active issue that we have to battle in the next 5 years. That's really my only criterion.
I want to mention too that what you and I were talking about privately earlier, which was the issues that were brought up by Dave Tott in response to the FCC. And I don't want to go into a whole thing. We did a whole session on this. And if I was a good host, I'd even know the number of it, but I don't. But look back a couple of weeks, and you'll see the Dave Tott FCC response. He put together, first of all, there was 250 signers of the petition. 50 of those people were probably people who invented things like NTP and so on. I mean, there are many, many pillar.
Yeah, Alan Johnson was one of them, wasn't he?
Right. I mean, this was, the internet wouldn't exist without some of the signatories. And the point is to narrow this down, to compress it to just a couple of sentences. The FCC proposed to lock down firmware in Wi-Fi routers. And Dave's problem with that is that he's spent his life trying to make Wi-Fi work better, and he couldn't do anything if he couldn't get into the firmware. But the bigger issue is things like backdoors, and the fact that if the FCC locks router firmware, then they can have the manufacturers who build these routers in their pocket and say, here, we have to have a backdoor, or we have to have this, or we have to have that. Point is, this was not a secrecy or privacy issue with Dave necessarily, but more an issue of being able to see what's in there and either make it work better or at least be able to warn people that there is a backdoor or there is a problem with it. And this is a huge issue, and it's all part of what we're talking about right now. So I wanted to send people over there, check out what Dave has been doing. He's a well-known advocate of making things work properly, and this often goes against the government, and that was the point I was reacting to, Aral, is that all governments everywhere, Germany, France, all Western governments, I don't know what non-Western governments are doing, but we can kind of imagine it's probably worse.
I think, yeah, I think the experience has shown, particularly recently, that heavy-handed responses when it comes to things like regulation actually work in exactly the opposite direction. It generates more resistance, and so you end up trying to stop, I don't know, terrorism or cyber terrorism, and if you're not careful, if you overdo it, overplay it, you end up generating an extra 10,000 cyber terrorists who just get cheesed off with the regulations that are being placed upon them. So there's a balance to be had with all these things.
Exactly.
And of course, I think it's really important to remember that it's not just governments, and that there isn't this dichotomy between governments and corporations, as we sometimes think. I mean, the answer to big government is not big corporations. They have a lot more in common with each other than they have with us as individuals. And there are revolving doors between them, and you mentioned regulations. I mean, one of the reasons why we can't have effective regulations today in, say, the European Commission is because of institutional corruption. We are institutionally corrupt in our state governments, in the European Commission. We have huge amounts of lobbying by corporations, by telecommunications companies. We saw recently that net neutrality was measured in Europe thanks to Oettinger. And if you look at the number of meetings that he's had with lobby groups, they're overwhelmingly with telecommunications companies, and whose direct interest it is for net neutrality to be in the way that it was. So we have this huge problem of corporate finance influencing public policy making. And until we get rid of that, and this is actually a single issue that Lawrence Lessig in the United States ran for presidency on until recently, until he was kind of forced out of the debates by the Democratic Party there. But that is how important this is. And Lawrence Lessig, if you might have heard of him, of course, was also the person behind Creative Commons. He's a very, very smart man, and he's going directly for the core of the heart of the issue. What we're seeing in some ways is a transfer of power between corporations and government. And as much as we may not like big governments, if we have a democracy and it is somewhat functioning, at least we have some level of agency. Now, they're not functioning well, and it's arguable that we have democracies today. But at least in idea, we have some agency. Where we have no agency whatsoever is a large corporation. So if we're talking about like a move between a transfer of power between governments to corporations, what we're moving towards really is a new feudalism. It's not kings and queens, it's CEOs.
I agree. I'm going to try to see if Tim has anything to say, because he's been in and out, and he may have a final comment since we're coming up to the hour.
You can't give Tim the final comment.
What's that?
You can't give him the final.
No, we need Carl, but Carl's not here.
You've got to wake him up first. Go on,
a final comment for
Come on,
himself.
I probably can't actually say anything much. I have lousy bandwidth and noisy environment, so probably best to hang out quietly here.
Okay.
And there's
And a beardless avatar as well.
Yeah. Looking very much like my evil twin there, Tim.
With a plaid shirt.
Well, the good news, Aral, is that there are lots of people around like you and us who have a huge amount of freedom, and we're able to do what we believe in. And I'm pleased to say that today I'm, well, virtually totally unconstrained from a legislative point of view on what I can do. There are lots of commercial pressures on me, but there are ways of getting around those. As I think we've shown over the last 10 years, we've done things that big corporations don't like, but we've continued to move forward. So, yeah, we've got a lot of freedom, and we're in control at this moment in time. And I think it's people who, at the open sourcey type end of the evolutionary chain at the moment, who are driving a lot of the really good stuff. It's not the large corporations. So I don't know what you think about that. So small skilled people are extremely important to this ecosystem.
So I will add something there, which is that I've just on the small people front, just because I felt I could and should, I submitted some evidence to the House of Commons Select Committee on which are reviewing the changes to the Interception of Communications Act. So that's kind of interesting to see how whether it's accepted, whether anybody reads it, whether it has any impact or not. But I mean, those routes are there, and one wonders to what effect they make any difference. I don't know. You suppose you'll never know for sure, but it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that amongst the population, there's this huge distrust of the government and what the government gets up to, and that's reflected in things like the script of the latest Bond movie, if you've seen that, where the evil global government get together to monitor all the communications, and James Bond pops out in his speedboat with his trusty Walter PPK to save the world. Yeah, so there's a lot of distrust out there, and corporations like Google, I think, are acutely aware of this. And if they start doing things that are perceived to be evil and approved to be evil, and bear in mind that just making money out of processing information in a useful way that's useful to customers is not evil in itself. Good business models where you make money because you do things in a more efficient way, that's good, I think.
Well, I think the key thing to remember is that Google's customers are not its users. So
I disagree with you. I'm a Google user, and that I don't pay them money.
Ads with them, James, then you're their customer.
Yeah.
If you use Google Mail, then you are the product that they sell to their customer. And that's a very important distinction. And you're right. I mean, what you said to me is exactly what Eric Schmidt said to me about a year or so ago. He said, if we become too evil, then we can't find anyone to work for us. And I thought it was quite a naive statement at the time. But I think what he actually meant was we can't find the best people to work for us. And they need the best people to become what they can become. Just like they need a total lack of regulations to become what they could possibly become.
Yeah, you're right there. And quite often the best people are those people who are very difficult to pin down and put into a corporate framework.
Well, again, though, they do spend a lot of money in indoctrinating the employees that they have. Every week there are meetings there where the virtues of Google are sung. And that's for a very specific reason. Again, if it becomes socially acceptable, unacceptable to work at Google, then they're not going to get those people. Just like it's hard possibly for Philip Morris to find the best people to work there, or maybe for Monsanto, or maybe for Halliburton. The same thing will happen to Google and Facebook once more people understand their core business model, and that it goes against some of their public relations that they have. So again, I think the key question to ask is how do they make money? And is that compatible with human rights?
I'm glad
Facebook do it. I would say no.
I'm glad you mentioned Halliburton because I was trying to remember the name of that company because I didn't want to say Monsanto because it's overused and
Halliburton changed their name?
Demonized. No. But anyway, Halliburton. I was about to say exactly that though, and I think there's some truth in both of these sides of the argument, which is, I don't think no matter. I feel, and this is just my feeling. It isn't even that much rational. I don't feel that we could ever, any of us, in any numbers, change Halliburton, what they do, how they get their contracts, or any of that stuff. Even though supposedly in a democracy you should, because they work for a government, right? But on the other hand, I do think, along with James, that if Google became visibly evil, there would be a problem. Not necessarily immediately. Okay, go ahead.
They're too clever for that. They're not the ball.
For sure.
And I think that's the difference between, say, a Google and a Microsoft, especially in the Steve Ballmer days. Microsoft was the ball, right? And of course, they got hit with regulations, etc. Google does this in a much cleverer way. They sponsor certain things. Like there was recently an article about how they're sponsoring. I think it's is it Freedom House, who has the country freedom indexes. How they're sponsoring those. They sponsor academic conferences, academics themselves to write things. So they are very clever. They're not going out there going, hey, we're going to be evil. They're never going to do that. Google's never going to be visibly evil unless they really mess up. I think it's up to us to understand that they will also not act in any way that is contrary to their core business model. And we have to ask ourselves, are we okay with their core business model, which is farming people? Are we okay with that being the core business model of Silicon Valley? And what kind of future does that create? Does that create a democracy or does that create a corporatocracy? Because I think we live in that corporatocracy today. And if anything, we have to work very hard to regain any semblance of a democracy going forward.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is as long as the output of the process is useful and serves the people will tolerate it. If it reaches a stage where the end result tips the power too far in one direction towards the corporations, then the people will revolt against it.
This sounds a lot like two words:
Power to
Soylent
people.
Green. Soylent Green.
Yeah, it's the second time I heard that today.
Really?
Yeah, I think the first was at the Parliament. So I think the question is, are we okay with the inputs being people? Are we okay with people being wronged? I mean, if you think about it, there was a time, and there was a time, and it still exists today, where we had a very lucrative business of selling people's bodies. And we called this slavery. And it still exists in certain parts of the world, and it's a terrible practice, and most of us agree that it's a terrible practice.
Yeah,
But
different thing is that slaves had no choice in the matter. But today, you have the choice. You can opt out of Google and LinkedIn. I noted that you weren't on LinkedIn, but Laura
mostly because of their horrendous user experience, but that's different. I mean, they do have the same business model. But can we truly opt out if all of the alternatives have the same business model? Because then what we're opting out of is modern life, access to modern life. And I think that's a problem. And we have to ask ourselves the really uncomfortable question of what do we call the business model of selling everything else about a person that makes them who they are, apart from their physical bodies. That's the business model of Silicon Valley today. That's the business model of mainstream technology. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what do we call it?
I have a challenge for everyone on this panel and anyone else who's hearing my voice. Let's do an hour on every possible clean alternative to things like maps, social networks, any of it. Because there are open source maps. I don't use one, although I have messed with it, but we all know that you can get that, right? Let's say just take that as an example because we don't have another hour, but we could do an hour on this, right?
Can I add to that challenge? Let's do that with a diverse panel. I don't want to do it, okay? But I want you guys to take the time, to take the effort to find experts, a diverse panel of experts across the spectrum here for that 1 hour, and I would love to sit and watch that conversation. Would you promise me?
Well, you can be a part of it. You can be a part of it.
Why don't you find the panel?
Sorry?
Let's all find it.
Why don't you go out and find this panel? Because you probably know some more diverse people than I do.
I will be more than happy to, and I'll be more than happy to suggest people who are experts in the area, and so that we can get a diverse panel on it. I don't necessarily have to be on it because there are people who can add more than I can to say an all-male lineup, who are both experts.
We want Laura.
Laura could be on there. She could be one of them, and she would do a great job on there as well. So
well,
yes.
Let's do this. I'm throwing the challenge out. Let's do this thing. Let us organize this. If anybody has any names to suggest, it'd be really great, by the way. And again, anyone who's listening to this, but also for you, Aral, and for Laura, if you do know anybody, please approach them first, because if you just give me a list of names, it's going to be a lot of work, and we don't really get paid for this stuff. But I'm totally willing to spend the time. Once people say, yeah, I'd do that, we'll get together and find a day when we can do it. We have up to 15 seats we can do. Thanks to Google, we could actually do up to
Thank you,
15.
Google, for that one.
Well, I pay for the 15-seat one.
We get some people like Phil Zimmerman on. But
Well,
then
we could get Phil Zimmerman
if
on.
we,
We can get
if we get him on, then you won't get him off again.
we can also get Dave Tott will be a part of that probably, or at least people who signed that list. Anyway, there are many people who could help us out. Andy, you have a final comment because we should probably cut it off here. Andy Abramson, anything?
Nothing
No.
on this other than the fact that we contribute the information ourselves. We don't have to worry about Big Brother looking after us. We do it. We contribute every day. There's only one solution, and if you've already been online, it's too late. The minute you register for a Social Security number, the post office sells data to Experian to verify, and then those of us who have taken steps to protect our identity constantly have to find that we are being outgunned or outmaneuvered without our knowing. You can find things out in strange ways. I found out that an Airbnb place I rented for 6 weeks ended up on my credit report, and Experian was rather embarrassed that they got it, which means one of their so-called trusted suppliers of information, a company that sells them information in exchange for getting information, shared it. I said, that's a vacation rental. Are you telling me every time I check into a hotel that you're going to have that on my credit report? And they were, oh no. So we're giving the information, and in some cases we don't know we've given the information. There's no checksum system that says your information has now been supplied to so and so. Would you like to remove it? You can
No,
easily
I'm
do.
fascinated, Andy. What did it say in your Airbnb report that would be of interest?
No. It's more of the fact that it showed up, and because it's a mixed-use facility, a live-work loft, it's considered high risk. It's just all types of things that are wrong with the steps that we've taken to protect our identity.
Yeah, but the good news is that this whole thing is kind of self-regulating, and as soon as somebody does something outrageous like the sort of thing that you just outlined, then there is a backlash. People are aware of this.
Well, the thing is, James, people are not aware of it. That's the dilemma. There's no. I see Aral shaking his head. We don't know where our information is going. We don't have. If I park my car, I know where I parked my car, but where I've parked my information, I don't know what they've done with it, and there's no communication that says, oh, dear Mr. Bodie, we've now supplied your information to these 13 sources.
Well, you don't know what they've done with it. You don't know what they're going to do with it in the future. They
Correct.
themselves probably don't know that. And this is where, in a democracy, we can pass laws. We can pass laws that limit certain things, that protect certain freedoms that humans have. And I think this is key. I mean, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar corporations here and saying they'll self-regulate. I think that the state of the world today has shown that they do not self-regulate. Eric Schmidt doesn't wake up in the morning and say, how do we better self-regulate? No, as he told me when I spoke to him, he says, I wake up every morning and I fight regulation. That's what I do. That's my job. Why do they fight regulation? Ask yourselves that. Right? I mean, this is like having a trust in like a benevolent dictator. The dictator may be benevolent, but I think we've evolved hopefully past systems of government, monarchies, for example, where we have to have that, right? Where we have to say, but the king might be benevolent, but dad, dad might be a good person, or maybe not. Maybe dad's abusive. Maybe the king is not a benevolent dictator.
Yeah. Well, I think it's clear that the optimum configuration to be in actually is that benign dictatorship, because that's where you can operate most efficiently. The problem is that it's very tricky to find a good, benign dictator who actually knows what they're doing, and they tend to be not particularly good.
I nominate you, James.
We have democracies, which is why we accept the risk that comes along with freedom and democracy, and we live as adults, not as children, always having to ask, please, sir, may I?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I quite like living in UK, because we've got a constitutional monarchy.
Without
which, it's got a whole load of checks and balances, and if things got too outrageous, then the brakes would be put on.
Would
But
the honorable gentleman...
James, just to say about the Brits, we live in the world today where 80 individuals, 80, have as much wealth as half of the world's poorest population combined. That's 3.5 billion people. We can't talk of checks and balances in this sort of a situation. We're talking about systemic inequality. You know, we're not talking. How can we talk about self-regulation or checks and balances when we live in an entirely unsustainable systemic state of systemic inequality? 80 people, as much wealth as 3.5 billion people. That's not sustainable. If the only thing we care about is the future of our species, we should care about these issues.
Well, you know what? I probably disagree with you. I think it probably is sustainable because it's always been that way. And
True.
there's a lot to be said for having...
James, we haven't always had the technology that we have. In the past, if we acted according to our base evolutionary desires, then the most we could destroy was maybe a village, maybe a town. Today we have the technological ability to destroy our own habitat, not the world. That's what's changed. That's what's unsustainable. Right now, we're like bacteria in a petri dish, sealed with some nutrients, right? And the way that that works is generation on generation, those bacteria will grow. They will grow in numbers. They will come to their most successful state one generation before they go extinct because of lack of resources. I think what we have to ask ourselves is, can we be better than that? Or do we just go with our base evolutionary desires and say, yeah, we'll just consume whatever there is, and the systemic inequality is fine, and we'll self-regulate to that point where we get to our most successful state, one generation.
I have a big... Yeah, come on, just let me get this point over. I have a big problem with people saying that wealth is bad, because if it wasn't for people with big lumps of money, I wouldn't be able to do all the good things I do, because people with big lumps of money allow me to do that.
But James, you're saying I have privilege, therefore privilege is fine. No, I think the only legitimate use of privilege is to create a world where you wouldn't have had it to begin with. Wealth isn't necessarily itself bad. We're talking about a distribution problem here. When 80 people have as much wealth as 3.5 billion people, we're talking about something that is entirely unsustainable. It is indefensible. And it's just not a sustainable future for our species. And those of us who benefit the most from it probably should turn the spotlight on themselves as much as possible to say, you know, yes, I benefit from this system, but you know, can we make this into a fairer, more equitable system for everyone going forward? You know, either we survive long-term sustainably in an egalitarian system, or we will go extinct.
And I think having access to modern telecommunications is probably the biggest single cultural leveler that humankind has ever seen. And all of a sudden, just having access to telecommunications, the ability for people to link and share thoughts and communicate across the globe, it really is a game changer.
Well, it can be used both ways. I mean, a drone can be used to kill a whole wedding party, or it could be used for somebody screwing around to...
Oh, yeah, and the internet can be used to radicalize...
No, wait a minute. My point is that Alfred Nobel, who invented dynamite, right? Dynamite, in his idea, dynamite was used to build bridges, but you can also blow bridges up. So with that, I think we should end, only because we could talk about this for 16 hours, and I would be happy to do that, by the way.
And
but no one's going to watch.
Talk about heartbeat.
No one is going to. Well, we did. No one's going to watch a video that's this long. That's why. But I suggest that we get together this panel. I think that would be fascinating. Go ahead, Aral. You're the guest, and I think you should conclude. The URL is below me there. It's Ind.ie. You should go investigate what these guys are doing. Guys, I say guys, I mean both sexes. Hello? This is just a figure of speech, so let's not have any internet hate.
Well, you've got her tied up in a back room or something like that. Liberate Laura, that's what I was saying.
First of all, let Aral finish, and he can do what he wants with his spot to finish. Go ahead, Aral.
As Melvin Kranzberg says, technology is neither good nor bad. And I think that's the point that you were making, Randy, as well. And that is the key point. And I agree with James that the telecommunications technologies that we have today are a game changer, which is why it is so important that they benefit the commons, which is why it's so important that people have equal access to them, which is why it's so important that they are not filtered by a very limited number of people, which is why it's so important that they're decentralized and not centralized in their nature. So yes, technology is neither good nor bad, but we have to remember neither is it neutral. And today, it is essential that we have the right technologies if we care about protecting our human rights and democracy.
Okay, Aral, I want to thank you. I want to thank Laura for all of her patience with us over these months. I want to thank everybody on the panel. And we will be back. We're going to do this challenge thing. We are going to bring a bunch of people on and bring on alternatives to all of these huge military, industrial, complex things. Liberate Laura, James says. Laura, thank you for everything. And thanks to you, Andy Abramson, Andy Smith, and James Bodie, and Tim, who's not with us. We're going to cut this off and move to the mature audiences only segment. Here we go. Randy, cue the video.